In the meeting. Thank you. Moving on, 7E, direction on short-term rental ordinance. I will turn it over to the city administrator to give us an update, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So obviously, the city has been discussing short-term rentals for some time. 2021, a task force reviewing the issue did submit a draft for the council to consider. The council had discussion and input from the public was given on that ordinance. I think it was back in October. And then that was sent back for revision. I did attach a new revised red line version of that ordinance. The red lines are mostly my changes upon review of the ordinance and reviewing previous public comments, as well as discussions obviously with the staff and members of the council on somewhat the concerns were. There really are four things I'm literally looking for from the council tonight. I'm just gonna jump to the end of what we're looking for to guide your discussion. The first is whether or not to implement the draft ordinance with or without any revisions you might have, or defer short-term rental administration enforcement to Crow Wing County. Again, Crow Wing County did begin its own licensing process and is doing this licensing process that's required throughout the county, no matter if a local municipality has their own ordinance or not. So if the city decides to do its own ordinance, any short-term rentals in the city would be required to still get a Crow Wing County license as well. So an options again is, do you want to have your own ordinance or do you want to just defer it to the county? If the council does choose to have its own ordinance, there's two things that I do need from you tonight. One is to provide comments on the draft ordinance that was provided to you in the packet. And the purpose of that, again, is just to get direction, make sure you agree with the language, or is there any changes or additions you'd like to see in the language in preparation for you to have formal consideration, hold a public hearing, and potentially adopt an ordinance at your July meeting. Also, if you choose to adopt the draft ordinance, we need to look at setting the amount for both the licensing fees. Obviously, this would be a license, so we need to talk about what would the license fee be, as well as administrative citations. You know, in part of the enforcement process to give, I think it's something the council talked about in October, to give this thing teeth. It talks about how are we going to enforce it, and one of the proposals we have is using the city's language 10.98 on administrative citations. So if someone is cited of having an issue and does not address it, refuses to address it, we can cite them. However, the city's ordinance doesn't identify what citation amounts are for specific violations. So we'd be looking at minimum setting a citation amount for violations of this ordinance and potentially violations of any ordinance. And the final thing we are looking for is, regardless of whether you adopt your own ordinance or defer to Crow Wing County, there is currently a conflict between the city's zoning code and Crow Wing County short-term licensing. And that is, the city's zoning code currently only allows short-term rentals in the R4, the commercial, and the resort commercial districts. However, the county, for lack of a better term, doesn't care. They license anywhere within Crow Wing County, regardless of, essentially regardless of local requirements. And so the issue becomes, the city also obviously has the right to be more restrictive than the county in saying we only want it to be in certain areas. The issue will be is that as we experienced dealing with Crow Wing County in the past, they're likely not going to take our zoning code into account. So while the council can absolutely decide to say, no, we're going to keep it restricted in certain areas, there will be a conflict that does arise in enforcement of this, in that the county may license a property not in a zone, and then we have to come on the back end and so say, no, you actually cannot operate there because the city of Breezy Point doesn't allow it, and then we have to have that enforcement of working with that person saying, yes, I know Crow Wing County gave you a license, but you're actually not allowed to work here, and if you operate, we'll have to proceed with enforcement action against you. So there is a conflict there, and just looking for direction of how you want to address that, either stick with what you have, open it up citywide, or maybe something in between. So those are really kind of the four things I'm looking for the council tonight. Mr. Mayor, I'll hand it over to you for any comments, questions, this deliberation that the council has.
Clarification on the last one on item 4, for my point, and maybe the rest of the council has this as well, but, so I understand the zoning conflict. However, if we have our own ordinance,
Correct.
and it states in our ordinance that these are the areas in which they can have their short-term rentals, they would not be able to operate because ours is more restrictive, and they would have to have both licenses. They would have to have Crow Wing County's plus ours. So regardless of the fact that Crow Wing County would issue a license, they still wouldn't be able to get a license for us, therefore would not be able to operate, even though they had Crow Wing County's license, if
That-
we had our own ordinance in place.
That is correct.
Okay. So to a degree, it's a conflict, but in reality, it isn't, because we would have our ordinance then saying, we're more restrictive, sorry, if you want to play in Breezy Point, you've got to meet this, and if you are in this area, it doesn't meet within our ordinance, and even though Crow Wing County gave you that, so it's the more restrictive policy that stays in place then.
Correct. It would just,
Okay.
again, it would
Yes.
just, that'd be obviously on the city side to enforce that.
Right, well, they'd ultimately have to get a license from us, and if they didn't, they'd be in violation right there.
Correct.
So, okay.
I'm
I
just-
just
my
wanted
point
to
is
make
just
sure I
that-
was on the same page.
Yep,
and
my
I was
point is
right.
just to
Okay.
say that Crow Wing County is probably not gonna do that policing for us.
No, they're not. No, that would fall to us, but ultimately, those people have to come in and get a license from us. And if we see in the application that they're not in the correct zoning, we're going to tell them, sorry,
That
we
is
can't
correct.
give you a license.
Correct.
Okay. Are there any clarifications or other questions before because I'm going to go back up to 1 and we're going to write down the list. Any clarifications on any of the information provided?
No.
Okay.
No.
So we're going to go back up to number 1 and really just go down the list. And basically it is, what does the council want to do? Do we want to move forward with the draft ordinance that we have in front of us that's been redlined and we've seen and reviewed? Or do we want to go with looking at taking the administration of Crow Wing County and allowing them to do it? Now, I'm just going to make this comment, and I don't want to speak for the council, but based on our last discussions we had, it was pretty obvious that this council stated they would like to have their own ordinance in place and not go with Crow Wing County. Am I hearing anything different from the council at this point?
I would like a more restrictive ordinance than what the county has.
Correct.
If that's what you're asking, then yes.
Right, and that means then that we would go with our own ordinance and not Crow Wing County's. We would not allow them to do the administration, we would do the administration in the city.
Agreed.
Agreed? Councilmember Ball?
I understand that to be the consensus, yes.
Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page with that.
I do have one clarifying question.
Okay,
A community has opted out of the short-term rental within Crow Wing County, has it not?
go ahead.
Correct. The city of Ironton recently adopted an ordinance saying no short-term rentals at all, period. Effective, I believe it's the day after Labor Day.
Okay.
From my understanding, the county is respecting that in that it's a zero policy.
Right, it's pretty simple, so.
Just for clarification, thank you.
Absolutely. So basically then, really our question at hand is where are we at with the draft ordinance that was presented to us right now? We have to, because we have to make a decision on, are we comfortable with this draft ordinance? Because ultimately, it's got to go back to the citizens one more time, because changes have been made, so we are required to have one more public hearing on it. What we heard the city administrator state is that that would take place in July if we can get all the other pieces in order, which would make sense, because we want to get this done as soon as we can, but in a correct manner. So with the draft ordinance setting in front of us right now, are there any further things that we feel that we need to take action on or make changes to based on what's there. Good. Councilmember Maroney.
I will go back to a discussion that we had back in November. I still see issues. I can appreciate that there are some items that were clarified. Example is being the bedroom sizes and how many occupants should be classified in a bedroom. And again, for purpose that is at the, I forget which section, but K3K, occupancy of a short-term rental unit shall be determined by bedroom size. Bedroom shall be at least 70 square feet for one occupant, 90 square feet for two occupants, additional 50 square feet per each occupant after that. I do appreciate that that was modified into there so we can have some
Yeah.
visibility of what that is. Number of other items, you know, the parkings, improved parkings,
Right.
some good things. However, I still, in discussing with citizens,
Yep.
is I still don't think that it's it should be available city-wide.
Okay.
I liked our current ordinance restricting to R4 commercial, resort commercial districts.
Which unless I'm wrong, that's what we would be existing on if we adopted because that's just basically what the city administrator spoke to us, is we would be restricted to those areas. It wouldn't be open citywide, correct?
Correct. So right now, this would not, adopting this ordinance is a licensing ordinance. It actually would not supplant your zoning code. So this
Zoning
would
code
say,
still stay in effect.
the zoning code still stays in effect. So if the zoning code still says, would still say R4 commercial and resort commercial, it's just that now there's actually a licensing process to operate in those districts.
Okay, good, I'm glad to hear that. One of the items, though, that was mentioned was a resident that may own said property next door that they'd like their short-term rental out. We've heard from a number of people at the public forums that complain that somebody may own something and not be around to maintain it. A manager may not be always around, where one of the things that was brought up is if I was an owner that lived next to said property, I would have a little bit more immediate recourse. I'd be more immediate available. I'd have a care of what's happening in the neighborhood. I don't know how to word that, but something along the lines, if you lived homesteaded within 1,000 feet,
Okay.
fictitious number, of said property.
I guess I'm not following where you're going with that.
Reason being is as a renter, if I was to come into town and buy 20 properties
Yep.
throughout the city, but I live in
Yeah,
Minneapolis,
wherever, yeah.
I have a management company, I really don't have a stake of what's happening in Breezy Point or the neighborhood.
Yep.
Whereas if you lived near your parcels,
So you're saying requirement of a residence within that whatever distance?
outside of the districts of R4, C, and RC,
Oh, I see what you're saying.
possible to have a short-term rental. Do we want that? Would that be allowed? If I lived in a R2 district and my next door home goes up for sale, can I rent that out?
My thought process is if we're gonna go with restrictions that we're saying right now, to say then is there an option to have this in this area if this is there? How complicated do you wanna make it? And how complicated do we wanna make it for the people that at the end of the day that are gonna have to enforce it? And I guess my personal thought on that is that, you know, you just add another whole level there. I think if the existing ordinance we have right now states it's in these zoning areas only, then I think the ordinance that we need to move forward with stays within those areas only. And I understand that's not gonna make everybody happy, but you don't make everybody happy all the time. We can't, I don't think we can meet everybody's needs for this. And maybe again, we get something in place and we use it for several years and we look at it and maybe there's a potential then to come back and revisit it and say, okay, now let's make a change to the ordinance and add this piece in that says if this, then this. After we see what level of workload is gonna be put on people, what level of incidents are we gonna have? We don't know any of this now because we still don't have an ordinance in place to use, to really see it. It's almost like, you know, you see a lot of people enact laws. I see the Department of Natural Resources do this all the time. They do a 3-year trial and they'll do a sunset on it. just to see how it goes, and then they come back and make changes to it if they need to.
Yep.
But I guess that's kind of where I'm at with that idea. I'm not opposed to it, but I'm like, at this point, so
Okay.
that's my thoughts. I don't know about the rest of the council, but that's my thinking. Other stuff?
A lot of things were definitely addressed if it's restricted still to R4 commercial and resort commercial.
And it would be, because our zoning, as the administrator says, does not change. So that still is gonna govern it, with the ordinance then being the enforcement act upon which that's done.
Well, and isn't that an item up for discussion? I don't want to,
Go.
I mean, it's number 4, right? So we're going one by one?
Yes,
So I don't want to,
No, no,
I mean, you
jump in
all
there.
may vote to keep the zoning the same, but I may be in
Yeah.
opposition to that.
No,
So I just don't want to
that's okay.
jump too
Yeah.
far ahead. If
No.
we're at number 1 right now.
we're just going through all the different ones, just getting to the point, do we even wanna go with this existing?
Correct.
And I was answering just because he asked about that piece.
Correct.
Is there anything else on that one right now? So again, it comes back to, so really 2, 3, and 4, well, 2 and 3 are predicated on adopting the draft. So maybe we need to jump to 4, because it sounds like that's to the point, if we adopt the draft ordinance, then we need to address what you would like to discuss.
That's
Go ahead.
whatever you want. I mean, when we had discussed this previously, I didn't understand that we were going to keep the zoning the same. To me, the discussion sounded like it was going to be opened up more broadly, and that's personally what I'm in favor of, just because we know that individuals are going to be renting their properties out throughout the city regardless of what the zoning ordinance says, even if they're in violation of it. So I'd rather be able to regulate it through a license if we can, rather than just,
So you're saying citywide,
yes.
which then leads us back to, then we would have to change it within our ordinance, our zoning to allow that, correct?
Correct. We could either, there's a couple ways you could do that, as just as an additional ordinance on top of this one, or we could look at a possible way of, in the adoption ordinance, we adopt this and repeal the other.
Okay.
There's a lot of different ways administratively how we would make that happen. But that, yeah, you would have to adopt this language is really the licensing language, and if you wanted to change the zoning part, that would be a separate
Separate.
change.
And the zoning ordinance is just very confusing, I think, as it's written anyways, is it not? I mean, there is the 3 areas, and isn't there some limited outside of that, those 3 zones?
That I'm not
I
aware
think
of.
that
Correct
would
me if
be
I'm wrong.
It's
the
very
non-conforming properties, the lot properties that existed
I thought there
before
was
the
some sort of
ordinance.
4-time-a-year thing, or is that only in the 3?
That's part of what the current ordinance says. So this,
That's the current
this,
ordinance.
this
Right.
licensing would supersede the 4-time-a-year. Likely, I think that's the intention. This would replace the 4-time-a-year restriction, but not necessarily replace the zoning district restriction.
So there's 2
That's how,
separate things.
that's how I have understood it coming into this, is this would maybe replace that 4-time-a-year that our current ordinance talks about, but not necessarily the districts, unless that's what the council wants.
I believe 4 times a year is allowed citywide, up to 4 times a year.
That's what my understanding was.
Yes.
So I thought there was sort of this,
Long-term rentals is allowed I believe citywide. I'd have to be corrected on that, but that's, I think this is,
long-term rentals? Okay.
yes,
My understanding, yeah.
yeah. That I don't think would change. You could still rent wherever, up to 4
No,
times.
I would hope not.
Yeah, that's different. This is short-term, not long-term.
Correct.
But long-term isn't being discussed,
No, it's not.
so it can still be rented out.
Yes, it can.
Yes.
Yes,
okay.
no, I
That's
agree.
That's what I want to clarify.
Yeah, no, that's not what we're considering as long-term. We're considering short-term.
Short-term.
That's what it has been from the
The
beginning.
VRBOs, the weekends,
Yes.
the week-long. It's
Yes.
not I'm putting up a house for
months
rent for
rent,
6
right,
months, a year,
exactly.
2 years,
Right.
no.
So did that answer your question? Or did that,
Not completely. I guess I wish Tom was here, because I feel like he knows it better, or maybe you know. I mean, can you confirm that
It's
that's
very confusing.
how it's written? That it's just, this just is going to impact
This'll
those three
impact just short-term.
districts?
So this would impact any short-term rental anywhere. So if you are a short-term rental, you have to go through, this is their licensing. You have to get this and say you have to have a license, and this is the procedure for being licensed, regulations for being licensed, all of that. The other pieces say, okay, this governs how you can operate. The zoning code governs where you can operate. So there's the how and the where. This piece is the how. So
It's
you
not
have-
the where.
not
And the
the
where
where.
currently is still the restrictive in the zoning right now.
Correct.
In the zoning ordinance, it states only those 3 areas can be used for a place in those 3 areas can be used as a short-term rental.
Correct.
That's in the zoning. So that's what David is trying to explain, is that it is correct. It's the how and the where. This is how it is to be done. That would be where it could be done. And they're 2 separate pieces. They're completely separated from each
And
other.
really, again, the only reason that the where piece is up for discussion is because the county is licensing their piece anywhere.
Anywhere.
So that's where there's that dichotomy of, that's where they're looking at the kind of decision from the council. Do you want to keep it the where? Do you want to keep it as it is now, expand it, reduce it?
But
Just so we know.
Ultimately, though, we could approve this draft ordinance as to the how and then look at the where at a later time,
Correct.
okay? So I think,
Right.
Therein lies the key.
well, right, but
I mean, I'm fine with that. I mean, I think I was comfortable with the draft before. I'm comfortable with the draft now. I think having something like this is better than having nothing. We keep hearing from the residents that we need something that has more enforcement, more teeth.
Yep.
But we've gone almost a whole year now with nothing, so.
I agree.
So it answers all the bugaboos in a way. Control and punishment, etc.
Right.
And able to finesse it down the road to tighten it up.
We can, or, so.
I think that's a key. It's very important.
Well, I think it's important to understand the 2 separate things too. That it's the how and the where, they're 2 separate things, and they
Yes.
have to be done in 2 separate ways. So if we can put the where in place, or I should say the how.
The how.
In place, we can look at the where in the future and determine if we want to make a change, such as Councilmember Maroney spoke about, with the idea that we could change that or finesse that, or
Correct.
make it less restrictive, which is kind of what you've spoken to as well,
Yes.
Councilmember Ball. So I think it's important that we keep that in our minds, that if we vote and approve this draft ordinance, we are voting to approve the how it's going to be done. And then the where is the other piece that we potentially can look at. But I think this is an important piece because, as you've said, Councilmember Ball, we haven't had anything for a year of the how. The where still sits there. That hasn't changed.
Yes.
And as doing some research here, in our ordinance, all areas,
Number, Michael?
so, well, this is what I was gonna get to, is in the land use categories chart, rentals more than 4 times per year, so it's clarifying anything more than 4 times a year, is an excluded use in all except for RC and, it scrolls more. And then interim use in R4, C, and a conditional in RC. So it's an excluded use to rent more than 4 times.
So, but,
That's why we're talking short term.
right, but they can do 4 times a
Up to
year
4.
as a short-term rental anywhere in the city.
Technically, yes.
Okay, so that was what I was trying to get at. Is that changing? Because
That would not be changing right now.
Okay.
And a little of clarification on that too is, again, maybe a reason, as the mayor said, to look at that piece later, is because how that language reads, that's pretty much any kind of rental. So it could be even a long-term rental. It would kind of indicates that even a long-term rental, you can't be issuing more than 4 leases in a year. Because I think the idea of the purpose of that ordinance is to keep something from constantly turning over. So, if you wanted to rent out to someone for 6 months and then rent out for 3 people for 2 weeks at a time, you could do that, but then you're done. So the idea was to give some flexibility without allowing something to turn into a short-term rental.
Clear as mud, right?
Yep.
Well, yeah, it's just not written well, so I mean, we might want to get back to it at some point, but yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's exactly what we want to do, is
Yes.
get back to that. And I
Yeah.
think that's why I was trying to delineate, let's get the how handled, and then let's have our staff, and have our
Yes.
staff work to put the information together where we can come back and visit that and start looking at that, and that ultimately has to go through the planning and zoning, because that's the zoning ordinance. So they would have to address that, and we'd have to look at that, but we can definitely do that. So, all good discussion, that's what this is about.
I think
So
Gary-
we're at, again, looking at,
On board.
implementing the draft ordinance, and going that direction. If we do that, then we have to look at having another public hearing in July so that the public can have comment on this. And I think that's important too, as we talk to the citizens, to clarify to them these two different pieces here of what's going on of this, so that they understand too, because we're sitting up here struggling to understand it also. As a citizen of the city, I can understand where they may have some confusion too. And then the other piece is, if we do adopt the draft ordinance, to provide the direction as the amount at which administrative citations and license fees should be set. So my question is this, because I think we probably need to have some time to think about that, rather than sit here off the top of our heads and try to come up with fees.
And I've run some numbers, and I can make a recommendation if you want me to, Mayor, or come back another time with that. Or I can, it's something maybe the finance committee wants to look at.
You want to tackle it next meeting?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking about, we probably need some time to at least see your recommendations. What they are,
Recommendations, and
for us
then-
to review them.
Yes.
And then potentially take action on them at the next council meeting. I think we
Yes.
could do that, and I think we're still okay.
Yep.
As long as we make a motion to adopt this draft ordinance and move forward, then that sets that in motion so that we can have that information. We can have the public hearing at that time. We can then listen to the citizens' comments to make sure if there's anything there that we need to take into consideration before we actually ratify it as a final, which then allows us time to set the citations and the fees as well. So that gives our staff time, it gives the council time to be able to make sure we've got it all where we want it, rather than sitting up here trying to shoot from the hip.
Yep, no, I agree.
So basically where we're at now, do I have a motion from the council to adopt the draft ordinance as presented to us to move forward to a final public hearing in July?
So moved.
I'll second.
I have a motion from Councilmember Bach, and I have a second from Councilmember Ball. Further discussion?
I just have clarification. Why are we adopting a draft? Aren't we just asking for the draft to be forwarded to the public hearing?
Well, I think what we're doing is, by making a motion and approving it, we're saying this is what we're gonna go with. In other words, we are agreeing that this is the draft ordinance we want to put to the citizens, and that unless barring any significant changes, we would be moving forward to ratify it. Unless you don't feel that, that's kind of where I'm at.
Worded wrong in my opinion, but we have a first and a second.
Can, just for clarification, can we make modifications at that July hearing to this draft?
Yes, because it's still a draft.
Okay, just,
This isn't final ratification. This
Perfect.
is just us saying, this is the draft as a council that we're behind.
because just for example, like under 5B, your addition about 7 days, just a clarification that that's 7 business days in which they would have to respond to the notice of violation in writing. So whether it's business days or calendar days, that's just one item that I would like clarified.
And that's what we're looking for. If there's
Yeah.
something you wanted in here, if you wanted to say, I think it was intended to say, I think calendar days, if you want to clarify that it should be business days, that's some change we can make to have.
In July.
Well, yeah, it'll be in the ordinance that the public hearing is held on in July.
Fees in July, okay,
Yeah.
thank
The
you.
idea is if there's any changes you want made now, let me know. We'll make those changes
Do we
prior
need
to
to
the public
discuss
hearing.
them now for the group to agree to them, or?
If you want to, if there's some now, it would be easier to implement them now than have to amend the ordinance or change the draft in July.
Did you have anything else?
You can do it at
besides the
either
7
time, though.
business days?
No,
Does
I
it-
mean,
Does the council have an issue with 7 business days compared to 7 calendar?
No,
I don't either, so.
no, I mean, it's just not clear either way, but I think
Yeah.
business maybe makes more sense, but.
And that makes sense. I'm okay with 7 business days. I don't have an issue with that.
Okay. Yeah, I
of
don't
time.
have anything else.
Do you have anything else,
Substantive.
Councilman Maroney?
Not this time.
Okay.
And then again, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, after you hold your public hearing in July, if there are other amendments you want to make based on what you heard from the
Yes.
public, you're absolutely free to make those
Correct.
amendments at that time.
sure.
Great, thank you.
Ultimately, probably in August, probably, we would bring it back for a final approval, which would be ratifying it then.
And this public hearing would be at council, not at planning and zoning, correct?
Correct. It'll be here. It'll be at our next scheduled council meeting, which will
Yes.
be July 5th, the day after the 4th. So, yes, just like we've held in the past. Yeah. All right, any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carried. All right, we have one more item to take care of, and that's the one that was removed from the consent agenda. Would be 4H, resolution appointing election judges for 2022 elections.
I'll make a motion to approve 4H with corrections of the current council.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, so I have a motion from Councilmember Maroney, a second from Councilmember Ball to approve it with corrections with the current council on it. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. With that, I've moved to item 8, unless there's any other business from the council at this time. Hearing none, item 8, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
I have a motion from Councilmember Maroney.
I'll second.
I have a second from Councilmember Ball. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carried. Meeting is adjourned.